My name is Maria Cardiellos, and I'm the Executive Director of the IJIS Institute. We welcome you here today for the CJIS Security Policy webinar. And for those that have been staying tuned and part of our IJIS community, you know that we've been running a series to keep up to date with and on the cutting edge of what are the security updates that come from FBI CJIS. We're very pleased today to have Charlie Schaefer, who is a representative of the Microsoft Corporation, and is also our CJIS Security Working Group Chair, as well as Chris Weatherly, who is the Security Information Officer for FBI CJIS, that then will lead us not only in the progress that the IJIS Community Working Group has made to support the security updates, but then most importantly, Chris to lead us in the discussion of the most recent release, address the details, and be responsive to your questions. Now, just from a matter of housekeeping, if most folks haven't seen on the list of attendees, we did have a registration of nearly 1,000 individuals. So we're dealing with very high volume issues. Not sure that everybody has already joined because we're right at the top of the hour, but we do anticipate a full group. We will try to get to everyone's questions. And given the process that we've successfully utilized in the past, we will go through a very brief overview of the IJIS organization, because I'm guessing with nearly 1,000 individuals, not everyone knows who we are and what we try to do for the constituent groups. But then we will get into a level of detail of the working group processes and services available, and into the most important part of the section, which is then Chris's address of the updates. When we get to questions, if we are lucky enough to still have time to address everyone's questions, we'll deal with them live. If not, what we've chatted about is maybe doing a follow-up session internally to tape Chris's responses and then make that available to the attendees. So with all that said, I am going to share my screen and provide everyone a very brief overview of the IJIS Institute. And hopefully you all see what are slides, and I'll trust that my communications and outreach specialist, Alex McAdoo, will tell me if there's any problems. But in order to introduce the IJIS Institute, we want to be able to share and give you a little bit on I want to make sure why my slides aren't moving here, so forgive me for here we go. All right, the IJIS Institute is a private nonprofit that has been in existence for 23 years. We were initially seeded by the Department of Justice Bureau of Justice Assistance, and it was with the intent of bettering the relationship between public and private sector and the service providers that ultimately supported the information sharing mission. 23 years ago, it was the great focus was on CAD and RMS data. Today, the great focus is all data available to the right individuals at the right time in a secure manner. We now refer to ourselves as a collaboration network because in order to successfully address what are the operational priorities of the justice and public sector community, which I'll get into in a little bit later, we truly do need to understand what are the policy implications, the operational priorities, and then the technical data sharing tools that could be available to practitioners in order to help them understand the availability of data and, of course, make those wise decisions in a timely fashion. How we then address those priorities is understanding the policies at the federal, state, county, local levels, understanding the disparate processes that exist at all those levels and throughout the disparate agencies that then service the communities at large. We know all too well that states operate very differently, but what we are starkly reminded of when we're in this data sharing community is the fact that two neighboring jurisdictions and police agencies or courts jurisdictions or corrections agencies right next door to one another are doing things in a very different fashion than their neighbor. It is important to us, however, to understand those disparities in order to ultimately enable what is the data sharing that must happen between the agencies and between the broader communities. The IJIS Institute and the IJIS Collaboration Network is not about a single solution, is not about a single technical tool. It is most certainly focusing on the interoperability of all the tools that may be out there and the standards that enable that data sharing. We look to, on the one hand, keep the continuity of the investments that the agencies have already had in play, not vastly modify the process, only make more efficient what they already have in place, but be responsive to their needs and to their priorities and make sure that the tools work for them as opposed to the inverse relationship. So in 23 years, just as we went from focusing mostly on CAD and RMS to now the world has changed, the world events is really what has changed us on a regular basis. Though we were constituted almost right before 9/11, 9/11 changed us. The world changed. The natural disasters, the man-made disasters, whether they were the codification of the report, whether they were Katrina, whether they were Sandy, whether they were school shootings that unfortunately happen way too often, whether they were the events of January 6th, or whether they were the pandemic. Every day, every year, there is a significant change that changes the way that practitioners from the public sector anticipate and rely on data. Just as each one of us typically have what our iPhones or smart devices in our hands, we expect on a daily basis and in our regular lives to have that information instantaneously available to us. In the public sector world, when we're dealing with the safety and health of our communities, of course, it's even more important to have the data available to the right individuals in the right manner for the right choices. The domains that I mentioned that I would touch on ultimately is the classic justice domain of law enforcement, public safety, fire, emergency, EMS, were the ones that we started with. What we move towards and what we continue to service is the Homeland Security domain, health and human services, education by way of school safety, and then critical infrastructure. For those of us that were in the response mode for 9/11, we know that even the terminology that spoke to responders was really everyone that had some stake in the game and had some need to be part of the solution set. And the solution set was response, was analysis, was availability of tools, was availability of services. So understanding all of those and balancing out the need of those priorities is certainly one that the IJIS community has taken on over the years. How we've done that is through what we are very proud of, which is the partnership not only between our key clients like the FBI CJIS community, but also the public and private sector entities that then are responsive and seek to enable the mission space. How we do that is making sure that we have public and private sector partnerships at every level of our organization. We have a board of directors that have individuals from our member communities that represent the private sector, and we have a board of advisors being developed in order to represent the public sector. So whether it is justice practitioners, whether it is school safety, whether it is health and human services, whether it's critical infrastructure, we're looking to understand that the voice of the public sector entity is at the table telling us what is most important today, or what is on the horizon, or what their challenges are in order to ultimately be able to be responsive to those. On a day-to-day basis, if that's the leadership view, on a day-to-day basis, our 7 standing committees, which then are depicted in this slide, whether it's law enforcement at the state and local level, whether it's CJIS at the federal levels, whether it's courts and corrections, each of those represent the communities that the public sector, the private sector, the policymakers, the statisticians, the researchers, the academics are all at the same working tables, meeting on a monthly basis and saying, what are the challenges and what can we collectively respond to in a manner that is reflective of the joint priorities and of the potential solutions to meet those priorities. The Emergency Communications Committee is one that was stood up at the very beginning of the pandemic. And it's interesting because as their world of the classic call taker and dispatcher was changing to then have more information that was important to provide the responder at the point of taking a call or dispatching a call, its move was more towards the paradigm of going towards a real-time crime center, which in and of itself is relatively new or relatively young in the broader information sharing community. It has the capacity to ultimately be moving more towards a fusion center, which is about focusing on a particular notion of a crisis or of a issue, and then making sure to fuse the data that is relevant either for that jurisdiction or for that state, or potentially when you have the communications open wide enough to be able to address regional issues. The two remaining committees are one of data analytics, because again, our world and our natural predilection is to have the availability of slicing and dicing the information and having it available to those individuals quickly. And then the Information Technology Advisory Committee, which truly is more one of emerging technologies. The cloud to us a decade ago was nomenclature that we would never have anticipated using within the classic justice community. And now it is second nature to us. We understand that we can do it in a secure fashion, and we continue to update and to secure, and the policy updates coming from CJIS is a perfect example of that. We continue to ensure that all of the securities necessary are in place and are very, very current. ITAC, the Information Technology Advisory Committee, will be looking at what are the emerging technologies like artificial intelligence, like generative AI. Issues that, on the one hand, yesterday we couldn't have even conceived of. Today we're not sure of, and we will explore, but tomorrow we want to make sure to be ready for in whatever fashion is appropriate from a policy perspective, an ops perspective, and ultimately a technology perspective. So just wrapping up the sort of the IJIS community services and what's available. We will always have, and traditionally have had for the several decades in place, the training and technical assistance, program and initiative management services, policy analysis, and tech advisory services. And what we typically do is have one or two annual events where we bring the broadest constituency base from all of those collective domains and from those communities of interest or practitioners and sort of service providers together to address what are themes that may have to do with up and coming and new issues, may have to do with understanding what the new technologies are, and ultimately addressing collectively the needs that face us as a community. We also provide what are topic-specific summits that then either address a particular domain and or address different operational challenges or technology issues that, again, have a certain niche of individuals coming from all those different groups that want then to gather for a day or two or three in order to address and slice and dice an issue. So why we were brought here today is to continue what has been the strong partnership between IJIS community, the collaboration community, and FBI CJIS in speaking to what are the CJIS Security Policy releases that over time, this past 22 and 23, has released 5.9.1, 2, and 3 respectively, and how in each of those releases addresses respective focus areas that we have then collaborated with the Bureau in order to provide you webinars. Those webinars are available on our website, so if you weren't able to participate with us, know that they are there available from a link perspective. Ultimately, and getting ready then to toss it over to our chair of the working group, the working group has then supported each one of those releases with what have been individual cliff notes. My generation says cliff notes or monarch notes that then are the cheater's way out, or really the clean baseline information that is required for individuals to successfully address the great level of detail that then Chris will review with us and is available to you in the policy itself. So Charlie, I'm going to toss it over to you. I don't know if you want me to keep this slide up, but certainly from a review of the work group or the working group, Charlie will speak to the detail and give you a little bit of the history, and he will then toss it over to Chris. Chris will deal with the essence of our gathering today, and then I will return later to support any deliberative questions.
Great. Thank you, Maria. And welcome, everyone. I am Charlie Schaefer, and I am an industry advisor for Microsoft Corporation, focusing on public safety and justice strategy. And I've been asked to chair the Security Policy Working Group in concert with the FBI CJIS Division and Chris Weatherly and his folks, primarily based on my background as a retired CJIS Systems Officer for the state of Florida and a member of the Security and Access Subcommittee for probably a decade or longer. And what we found is, as the policy was being modernized, there were some questions that both industry and practitioners needed to address. And eating it one bite at a time instead of trying to digest the entire elephant, we took on the task with both a practitioner perspective and an industry perspective to look at the different control families and say, how could we make this easier to digest, easier to comprehend, not be a replacement for the policy itself, but at least give, like Maria mentioned, a Cliff Note version of this is why this section is important, this is what it means to me, and then more importantly, from an industry perspective, who can you go to ask for help? The industry is in this space is vast, and there isn't one company that can answer every single one of these control families and help you get through it. But there are a number of companies and corporations that are good at certain aspects of that. And that's partly what we're wanting to share as we go through this is who can you call, who can you ask? And then from an industry perspective, what do we need to do to help practitioners conform to policy? So these are the deliverables that are on the IJIS website today. You can go there, it's ijis.org, and you can look under publications and you will find these artifacts that have already been delivered. And what Chris is going to talk to you about today is 5.9.3. And we are looking at that as a work group to do the same thing. So we are going to provide some analysis and some research, and then distill it down to something digestible. And then we will put it through the process and publish those in the same location for both industry and practitioners to use. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to Mr. Weatherly, the FBI CJIS Division Information Security Officer. Chris?
Thank you, Charlie. I appreciate that introduction, and a big shout out to the IJIS Institute for providing this format, allowing us to share this information with the criminal justice, non-criminal justice community. I just want to make sure that everybody can see the screen. If someone could give me a notice on that, that'd be awesome.
Yes, we can see it.
All right, great. So my name is Chris Weatherly. I'm the FBI CJIS Division Information Security Officer. And today I'm going to be walking you through the latest version of the CJIS Security Policy that hit the street back in September, I think is when it was released. But we're going to be looking at version 5.9.3. And why it worked when I was trying to share some slides here or advance my slides. And always happens, right? Bear with me. Are the slides advancing at all?
They are not.
Isn't that something?
If you were using Teams, we wouldn't have this problem.
If you do the right click and work on the program itself, then I was able to do page down because I had the same thing, Chris. For whatever reason, there you go. You're moved. You're good.
Good deal. All right. Thank you very much. I do apologize for that. So today I'm going to walk you through the CJIS Security Policy overview, when it's applicable and sometimes when it's not applicable, and that's even better to focus on when it's not applicable. It's a sizable document and it contains a lot of information assurance requirements. So it's almost you need to know when to apply it and when it's not applicable. We're going to go through like I said, the latest version, the version 5.9.3. We're going to cover access control. We're going to cover incident response. And then the last security control family we'll cover will be maintenance. And we speak about maintenance, it's not patching your system, although that is a critical part of our maintaining our system and our risk appetite. We're talking about our peripheral devices. What about our copiers, our printers? Who's coming in to work on those? What are they bringing? And then lastly, the slide at the very end will be the FBI CJIS ISO resources, and where we'll, if you have questions that you need to ask specifically to us about a certain implementation you're doing or understanding the policy, definitely you want to reach out to us there. This is the CJIS division. It's located in north central West Virginia on about 986 acres. We have roughly 3,200 employees employed at this. On the left side of the screen, you can see the CJIS main facility that was opened to employees in April of 1995. And in 2015, we opened the Biometric Technology Center in collaboration with the Department of Defense. Anything to do with biometrics, it is likely in this building here. A great group of people within our biometric services section work in this new building. The mission of the CJIS division, it is to equip our law enforcement, our national security and intelligence community partners with criminal justice information. Very important words there, and we'll get into that, criminal justice information. But we want to provide that to our partners that they need to protect the United States while protecting civil liberties, right? And tenets of information security are confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And if you distill in my arena, I try to apply that to our mission. And Maria alluded to it a minute ago. She said, getting the right information to the right person at the right time. Confidentiality, integrity, availability. Getting this criminal justice information to our partners so that they can help protect the United States and those civil liberties. So an overview of the CJIS security policy, it applies to everyone dealing with criminal justice information. And criminal justice information is defined as FBI CJIS provided information. And that is information that's coming back from information systems managed by the FBI CJIS division in Clarksburg, West Virginia. If you have state data or local data on a local repository, a server sitting in your architecture that just has state or local data on it, the CJIS security policy probably doesn't apply. Now, as an information assurance professional, I would tell you that data needs some sort of protection, but it's likely not the CJIS security policy. Definitely, you can use the CJIS security policy to enhance your security policy locally. I've even seen agencies that have ripped a cover sheet off the CJIS security policy, applied their own, and now that has become their security policy for the protection of their data locally. The second point we'll talk about here is this shared management philosophy. Back in 1995, Director Louis Free established the CJIS Advisory Policy Board, and he said, we have an NCIC Advisory Policy Board, National Crime Information Center, but what about the rest of the systems that the FBI is managing that manage state information, right? A high percentage of the information that we hold within the CJIS facility doesn't belong to us. It belongs to the states. It belongs to, those entities that create the data, right? And one of the things you'll hear is that the FBI said so. Well, the FBI said it had to be this way. You'll generally hear this on a local audit, when one of your state auditors comes in and says, we have to be doing this. We have to be doing multi-factor authentication. And somebody will inevitably say, well, why? Well, the FBI said so, right? We make these decisions together. We make them through the CJIS Advisory Policy Board, where every state has a representative. Every state has a local representative that comes from either National Sheriff's Association or IECP, the International Association of Chiefs of Police. Those, we brief all these changes in front of these groups within that advisory policy board. So it's not the FBI saying so. The FBI just manages the creation and the CJIS security policy for this group, but it is done in a collaborative effort. It does contain information security requirements. It's the minimum set, but those minimums are required for connectivity. If you're going to process or receive criminal justice information back from FBI CJIS, the CJIS security policy is what you'll be abiding by. And it does contain, it's a sizable document. It continues to grow. But it does contain a lot of guidelines and agreements, some best practices. The CJIS user agreements contained in here, management control agreement, the incident response form, things like this that are needed, as you're processing this criminal justice information. These things are also contained within the CJIS security policy. So as I promised, we're going to talk about CJIS Security Policy version 5.9.3. It was released or published on September 14th 2023. Actually, I'll take that back. That's when the FBI director approved it. We had to go through the processes of getting it published out on FBI.gov, but it was approved by the director on September 14th, 2023. And it did contain 3 control families that I briefly mentioned before. Access control is one we're going to talk about now. I want to speak a little bit to the nomenclature of the slides. You'll see the access control is the title of the modernized security control family. On the slides, you'll see white text, and some of that white text has black background behind it. And that indicates it's a new requirement. It is something that was not previously published within the CJIS security policy. It is a new requirement. The white text without the black background is controls that are information security requirements that already existed within the CJIS security policy. So going through this, there are 18 security control families. We have aligned the CJIS security policy with NIST 800-53, Rev 5, actually 5.1. So we have aligned the policy with that. And if it's AC1 within NIST 853, it's AC1 within the CJIS security policy. What we had the ability to do was, after we categorized criminal justice information, to see what the impact of the loss of confidentiality, integrity, or availability, what would be that loss? And the APB decided that it was a moderate loss, a moderate impact if we had a loss of confidentiality, the wrong person got it, or if the data changed, the integrity of the data, or if the data wasn't available, it was a moderate impact to confidentiality and integrity and availability. So where we had the ability to tailor the controls, the APB defined those organizationally defined values. So starting through this, like I said, there are 18 security control families, and each one of those security control families will have its own policy and procedures. You will have an access control policy. We do have templates available for that within the FBI CJIS ISO shop. Our CJIS audit unit has assembled those for us. So we do have those policy templates available. Should you need some, reach out to us. The policy, though, be creative when you're looking at any of these controls. Actually, if you're a local and you're not at the state level, and the state has a policy that you can inherit, or the state is using multi-factor authentication that you can inherit and you don't have to deploy your own, take advantage of that. Inherit whatever you can from someone who is already meeting that control, and will cover you under the umbrella of their implementation of that control. Now, when it gets to procedures, though, there may be, if the state has a access control policy, the local may have to develop their own procedures, right? A non-criminal justice agency may have to develop their own procedures to meet the policy that they're under for that access control or any other of the security families. As you can see, it's highlighted in black, therefore it is a new control. Also part of that new control is that we'll review that policy and procedures on an annual basis, just to make sure that we're still operating as we feel we should. Our risk appetite hasn't changed, and we're going to be operating with a renewed policy. Some of the AC2, when it gets into account management, you can see some of the controls there are not new. We want to define the types of accounts that are allowed and prohibited. We want to assign those account managers, require conditions for group and role membership. We do want to specify our authorized users, our group and role membership, and we do want to specify those access authorizations. And the way we're going to do that is through attributes for each account. And you can think of attributes sort of as privileges. I have an identity that's in my information system. What does that identity have the ability to see? What data do they have the ability to see? And we do that through AC2 D3, the access authorizations. Each identity within your information system will have to have these attributes associated with it. And a lot of these, are common sense: the email address, the employee name, their given name, their surname, their telephone number, right? But then we get down into what can that identity actually do? If you look over on the right-hand side, we see an NCIC certification indicator, which means that the identity has successfully passed their NCIC certification, and therefore can access NCIC to conduct queries against that. The index privilege indicator, yet another attribute that if you need to see index, then you'll have to have that privilege indicator associated with that identity. One of the other things I'll bring out, public safety officer indicator and sworn law enforcement indicator. There are services that, public safety officers can see, right? But however, there are, above and beyond that, sworn law enforcement indicators. These are the people who have the ability to arrest, that have been through the police officer training. They are sworn law enforcement and officers, and they have, there's certain data that only they can have access to, right? Some of the other things we'll be looking at is an authenticator assurance level. That's when we get into multi-factor authentication. There are 3 levels of authenticator assurance levels, 1, 2, and 3. Currently, the CJIS security policy requires us to be at a level 2, which says we have multi-factor authentication. Identity assurance level, we spoke about identification and authentication in an earlier webinar. What level of effort was used to verify the identity of that person or that identity that is being processed through our system here. So these are the attributes, the access authorizations. These are the mandatory ones. There could be some added, could be some deleted, right? We'll get into that as we get into this. There may be some attributes that need to be added based on the information sharing that the FBI CJIS and the criminal justice community is building to do. I will say this, that the CJIS division is looking at revamping how you interact with the CJIS division. Historically, if you needed NCIC, you would come to NCIC. If you needed index information, you'd come to index. And we're looking at more of a one search, CJIS, what do you know about this person? And CJIS, if something changes about that person, notify me, the user, right? So we are looking at that. So this slide here looks like it's daunting. Look at them as enablements, right? If an identity shows up with these attributes, either on or off, then it allows us to share the right information with the right person at the right time. Continuing in AC2, require those approvals, not a new requirement. Monitor the use, of course, again, not a new requirement. One of the new requirements, again, within AC2 is notify that account manager, the system or the network admins within 1 day when the account no longer needed or required, right? What if the user or the identity transfers? What if they're terminated, right? We need to notify these personnel to disable the account. What if the users or the identities need to know changes? They no longer have the ability to have access to index or something. We need to notify that account manager or those system and network admins so that they can make the changes to that. We're going to be authorizing the access, valid access, intended system usage, least privilege is something we'll talk about here in a little bit. And the way we authorize that access is through those attributes that we mentioned on the slide before. Review those accounts annually. Does this person still need access into our system? Annual is the minimum, right? You can do that more often, and I would encourage that. If the group, if you have someone that, if you're using, now you can see there it says a big if you're using group accounts, what's the process when someone is removed? Are we removing, changing the memorized secret that was required to get into that? What about other multi-factor authentication? What is that process if someone is removed? We need to have that, right? And we want to align this account management with our personnel termination and our transfer process. As I stated before, the CJIS security policy is growing. It's a large document. There's a lot of information assurance controls in there. IJIS is helping us out, particularly Charlie's group with looking at those Cliff Note versions, right? What are the breaking down the control families into digestible pieces, that's easily digestible by the users. But another way we can do that is through AC2.1, where we have automated system account management. We're using email, we're using phone, we're using text for that automated system account management. If you have temporary or emergency accounts, you need to get someone on the system, for an emergency, or if you have a temporary account, the system must remove that within 72 hours. And this is an automatic. The system will remove that account within 72 hours. And the reason we say within 72 hours, and when I say we, I'm talking, the Security Control Task Force of the APB, And we, just as a community, the reason we say this is because that within 72 hours, you've had time to properly vet that person that was asking for the account. You've had the time to properly create an account, to assign a multi-factor authentication authenticator to that identity. 72 hours is plenty of time for all that administrative processes to happen. As far as disabling accounts, you can see this is a new control. Disabling accounts within 1 week when the accounts have expired. They're no longer associated with the user. Perhaps there's a violation of the organizational policy, or they've been inactive for 90 days. We just want to make sure that those accounts are disabled. And what this does is it decreases the attack surface of the system, right? We don't have an inactive account that's been out there for years, 180 days, years that would provide an adversary an account to target to use to get access into our systems. AC24, not a new control, automatically audit the account creation, modification, and this aligns with our AU controls that we released recently as well, auditing and accountability. Inactivity logout. This is different from inactivity timeout, which we'll get into in a second. But AC2 Control Enhancement 5 speaks about that inactivity logout, and we're requiring a user to log out when their work period is complete, right? This is a management control. This is something we'll address in our rules of behavior with the identity, with the user. Require that user to log out when their work period is complete, right? At the end of their shift. Now, if they're getting up from their workstation to go to the restroom or maybe for a lunch break or, a well-deserved coffee break or something like that, we're not going to require them to log out at that time. We are going to require them to lock the system, and we'll talk about that in a second. But at the end of their work period, when they're done for the day, require that user to log out. Again, what that does is it removes that active account on the system and lessens that attack surface. AC2 Control Enhancement 13 talks about disabling accounts for high risk. If you get a notification that someone is a direct threat to confidentiality, integrity, or availability of the system, within 30 minutes of that discovery, you need to disable that account, right? We have a high-risk individual that has been identified. We need to disable that account within 30 minutes of discovery. Not new controls here in AC3, access enforcement. Of course, we're going to enforce approved authorizations for logical access using our, our account management, our account authorizations. Individual access. Enable individuals to have access to the elements of their PII, personally identifiable information. This helps keep your system accurate, the data within your system accurate about your users. So if you allow people to have access to the elements of their PII, they can notify you when something has changed. Perhaps they've got a name change or some address change or something like that. Definitely, we need to enable them to have access to those elements. AC4 talks about information flow enforcement, and we're controlling the flow of information to prevent, as we can see there, no unencrypted criminal justice information across the public network, right? Systems and Communications Protection, which is a family that'll be coming in version 5.9.4, talks about encryption of CJI at rest, in transit, right? We want to control the flow of information. No unencrypted CJI across the public network. And a public network is defined as something we don't control, right? We have our local networks. We have our wide area networks or local area networks or LANs, wide area networks, WANs. But if it goes across the public network, think something you don't control, think the internet, no unencrypted CJI across that internet. Sometimes traffic will show up on the exterior of our networks and it looks like it's coming from inside. Well, that's pretty much impossible. So we want to make sure that we block that outside traffic that appears to be coming from the inside. And we don't want every one of our devices, individual devices, having their own way to the internet, right? So we want to do those web requests from agency-controlled or internal boundary protection devices. Send those things to a web proxy, through a gateway, through a firewall, through a router. Not every information system should be making its own request to the internet, right? So we want to make sure we funnel those through one of those devices there, a web proxy, a gateway, a firewall, or a router, something that's proxying that device for that individual information system. Separation of duties, identify and document those duties. As you can see, again, not a new control. And that aligns with the least privilege. I told you we'd speak about this in a second. Just enough permission to complete the mission, right? Make sure that your identity has the privileges that they need to complete their part of the mission and nothing more, right? We don't need someone, or we will have individuals that will have, privileged access, right? And we'll get to those in just a second. But make sure that people who have identities on your system, they only have enough privileges to complete their part of the mission and nothing more. Again, this gets into, should that account be compromised, right? We want to limit the exposure to the system of that compromised account. AC6, still under the least privilege umbrella, but a control enhancement, authorized access to security functions. Don't have your security functions just sitting out there, we're talking like security relevant information in hardware, software, firmware. Just don't have it sitting out there available for everyone to get into. We want to establish system accounts, configure those access authorizations, event auditing, intrusion detection parameters, etc. Right? Access to those security functions, to those privileged users within your system. Don't just have your security relevant information available to everyone. Non-privileged access for non-security. If you have a privileged user on the system, make sure they have a general user role and identity credential, and they have a privileged user role and credential, right? You don't want to use privileged accounts to access general user information, right? That allows with a privileged account, you have greater access as you're perusing the system. You have greater abilities, right? So if you don't need that, make sure that they're using that appropriate role and credential for their general user access. Some of this, as I said before, is just common sense, right? AC 6.5 talks about privileged accounts. Restrict privileged accounts to privileged users, right? Make sure you have credentials on those privileged accounts, and those credentials are only given to our privileged users. Someone who's been trained, right? We talk about awareness and training. Someone who's been trained on the access, trained on the mission that they've been given, that is aware of what they're doing within the system, so that they can protect, the system themselves. AC 6.7, control enhancement number 7. We're still under that least privilege umbrella, but we want to review those user privileges at least annually, right? Reassign or remove to correctly reflect our organizational needs. Review those accounts and those user privileges at least annually. AC 6.9, log the use of privileged functions. Of course, we want to log the execution of privileged function. If someone is doing working on your security functions, we want to make sure that we're aware of what they're doing. We want to make sure we log it just in case something would happen later on down the road. We know who was responsible for that change, what the change was, and does it line up with a family that we're currently taking through. That was recently approved by the APB, configuration management, right? We know that this was an approved change, but by logging the use of those privileged functions, we know exactly who made that change and when it was made. And so it helps us in our incident response should something come up. Last control within the least privileges is prohibit those non-privileged users from executing privileged functions, right? General users don't have the need to execute privileged functions. So make sure that your general users don't have those general users, i.e. non-privileged users. We don't want them executing privileged functions. Don't give them the ability to run as an administrator, right? If they're going to do that, they need to sign in as an administrator, right? AC7, this is one that I usually say if it's AC7 within 800-53, NIST 800-53, it's AC7 within the CJIS Security Policy. But it's unsuccessful logon attempts. We want to limit that to 5 during a 15-minute time period. So if you fat finger your memorized secret, or if you fail to put in your one-time password 5 times within that 15-minute time period, then we roll to the second bullet, which we're going to automatically lock the account. And currently it says the admin must release that account, right? So if I fat finger my memorized secret or put in my one-time password inaccurately or incorrectly 5 times within a 15-minute period, my account is going to be locked, or that account is going to be locked. And an admin must release that account. System use notification. This is a warning banner that you see when you're signing on to a system. But before granting access, you want to make sure that you alert the identity that they're accessing a restricted information system, that their usage will be monitored, recorded, and it's subject to audit, that unauthorized use of the system is prohibited, and use of systems indicates your consent. The second part of this is that we're going to retain that message on the banner until the user takes explicit action, right? Acknowledgement. Make sure they hit OK, which says, okay, I've read your warning banner. I'm hitting OK, which means I'm acknowledging that I am accessing a restricted information system, that my usage is going to be monitored, that you're going to be watching what I do, and unauthorized system use of that system is prohibited. For publicly accessible systems, you would still want to have a warning banner, right? This is like if you have a web page or something like that. You still want a warning banner on there that is going to display that system use information, references to monitoring, recording, and description of the authorized uses of the system, so that the public knows what the authorized system or authorized use of the systems are. Device lock. Now, this is one we were talking about a minute ago. If you remember, we are going to require the user to log out at the end of their work period. That is a management control, right? We're going to tell the user that they must log out at the end of their work period. They're going to signify they understand and will abide by it in a rules of behavior. But sometimes that doesn't happen, right? And that's why we need a technical control as well. So AC 11 is that technical control where we say in a device lock that we're going to prevent further access after 30 minutes of inactivity. The identity hasn't, they've not scrolled, they're not using their mouse or keyboard, any of their input devices. After 30 minutes of inactivity, we're going to lock that. We're going to prevent further access. We're going to require that user to initiate before they leave the system unattended, right? Do a Windows L or a Control-Alt-Delete before you get up and go, for your lunch break. And we're going to retain that device lock until the user reestablishes access using identification and authentication. When they come back from lunch, right, they're going to be entering their identity. They're going to be entering their memorized secret. They're going to be entering their second factor of authentication to get back into that. Now, huge point of discussion here during the creation of this control. A large majority of our users that use the CJIS security policy are law enforcement, right? So we have an exemption to that device lock. And it says, in the interest of safety, devices that are part of a criminal justice conveyance, right? We're talking a cruiser. We're talking something that is a physically secure location, but it's part of a criminal justice conveyance, right? Or if it's used to perform dispatch functions and it's located within a physically secure location. And then last, you can see the or there. So if any one of these three applies, terminals designated solely for the purpose of receiving alert notifications. And an example of that is receive-only terminals used within a physically secure locations that remain staffed when in operation. These three things, in any one of these three things, are exempt from the device lock, right? So if I have an officer or have an MDT in a cruiser, and the officer at the beginning of their shift, or if they've locked it, if they've locked their terminal, they're entering their identity, they're entering their memorized secret, they're entering their second factor of authentication. But once they do that, this device is exempt from this locking, right? We don't want the device, we don't want the officer responding to an event and their MDT lock after 30 minutes of inactivity. We don't want that, right? So we want that in the interest of safety, that that device would be exempt from this requirement. When we do lock the device, AC 11 Control Enhancement 1's pattern hiding displays, we're going to conceal via that device lock information that was previously visible on the display with a publicly viewable image, right? So maybe it's a splash screen of the agency's badge or their mission or something like that, something that is publicly viewable. That's what we want to put on the screen when it locks from a device lock. AC 12 talks about session termination. Automatically terminate a user session after a user has been logged out. So the user logged out on themselves, by themselves. We want to make sure that we terminate any sessions that they had initiated in the system, right? Sometimes you can fire up a process that's in the back, that's running in the background. When that user logs out or has been logged out, we want to make sure that those processes are killed. We don't need these things eating up our memory, our RAM. We want to make sure that the identity that was associated with it, has logged out. We want to make sure we terminate any of those user-initiated sessions as well. AC 14 talks about permitted actions without identification or authentication. And this will be up to the agency to determine, and the CJIS systems officer or the SIB chief or the interface agency official, whomever signs the CJIS user agreement. There are certain things that should be permitted without identification or authentication. Think about a smartphone. If a smartphone rings, right? Do we need to authenticate to that device before we answer it? No, that just doesn't make sense, right? So we want to identify and document those specific user actions that do not require identification and authentication. And that is covered under AC 14. As far as remote access, these are remote access points coming into your systems. As you can see, none of this is a new requirement, but we do want to establish and document for each type of those access the usage restrictions, the configuration and connection requirements, the implementation guidance, authorize each type of remote access prior to allowing that access. Control Enhancement 1 talks about using automation to monitor and control that remote access, right? These are, and I'm talking about things that are coming into you from a public network into a network that you control, right? That is remote access into your system. We want to protect the confidentiality and integrity using encryption, the use of VPNs, virtual private networks. You could use TLS. A lot of people are moving in that direction versus using a VPN, right? We want to make sure we're using transport layer security or a VPN to protect the confidentiality and integrity. Also, Control Enhancement 3 there at the bottom of the slide talks about managed access control points. We're only allowing certain points to access that come in from remote access, right? We don't want multiple avenues of someone to get into our system from a remote vantage point. So we want to route those remote accesses through authorized and managed access control points. Filter all that information and those requests into something that is authorized, that you're managing, that you're watching. You have a security stack looking at that traffic coming into your network, right? Managed access control points. AC 17.4, if you have a compelling need for someone to do privilege commands and access, right, from a remote access standpoint, your system administrator lives 2 hours away, and there's an emergency, the system is down. Are you going to make that system admin drive in 2 hours, in the dead of night, or 6 inches of snow or whatever, to get the system back operating, right? This would be a compelling need to allow privilege commands and access from that remote access point. We just need to document the rationale in our system security plan and make sure that your CJIS systems officer, your SIB chief, your interface agency official has approved that privilege, that remote use of privilege commands and access. If you have wireless access into your systems, make sure you have, you establish configuration, connection requirements, implementation guidelines for each type of wireless access. Make sure you authorize each type of wireless access, right? If you have the ability, if you have wireless access points within your physically secure location, establish those configuration connection requirements, things like that. Authenticate in Control Enhancement 1 of AC 18, authenticate those authorized users and those agency devices. Make sure you're using encryption, right? Protecting the encryption of the data across that wireless access. AC 18 Control Enhancement 3 talks about disabling wireless networking. If you have a printer or a scanner or a copier that has wireless networking capabilities, but you're not using them, i.e. you have not configured them, you have not authorized them, you're not controlling them, disable them, right? That it decreases the attack surface within our networks. So disable that wireless networking on those devices if you're not using them. AC 19, access control for mobile devices. Authorize the connection to those mobile devices. Again, establish a configuration connection requirements for that on the mobile devices. The Security Control Task Force of the APB and Control Enhancement AC 19.5 said full device encryption. Employ full device encryption to protect the confidentiality and integrity. If you have a laptop, if you have a cell phone that has the ability to access criminal justice information, full device encryption is required on that. AC 20 talks about the use of external systems. Either establish policies govern the use of those external systems. You have an external system that is accessing your configured, your controlled, your managed system. Establish policies govern the use of those. Or prevent the use of BYOD, bring your own device. So either you establish policies governing the use of those bring your own devices, or you simply just prohibit the use of BYOD. Make sure you have policies around your BYOD is what that speaks to. Control enhancement under the use of those external systems, limits on authorized use. You can permit the authorized individuals to use those external systems after you've verified the controls on the external system, right? You've gone to painstaking challenges. You've gone to painstaking measures to secure your system, right? It's compliant with the CJIS security policy. Well, make sure that remote system that is accessing your secure system, meets the same level of compliance. Verify those controls. Retention of the processing agreements with the entity hosting that external system, right? Permit those authorized individuals to use that external system after you've done one of those two. Access control 20, external information systems, control enhancement 2, portable storage devices. Restrict, not prohibit, restrict your controlled portable storage devices on external systems. Do you want your officers or your personnel going to an external system and plugging in I was going to show some age there, a JAS drive, right? Or a jump drive or a USB, one of those external systems, a thumb drive, right? Do you want that to happen, right? So we want to restrict those controlled portable storages on those electronics, on those external systems. AC 21 talks about information sharing. When you're sharing information, ensure that system is secure for CJI, right? Use ABAC, attribute-based access control, to assist in sharing. Does the identities over there, make sure they have the sworn law enforcement indicator if they're getting sworn law enforcement information, right? But use that ensure the system is secure for criminal justice information and use that ABAC to assist in securing. The last control within access control is publicly accessible content. If your agency has a public web page, right, designate individuals who are authorized to make that information publicly accessible. Not everybody should be able to put information on that web page, right? We want to make sure that we designate those individuals who are authorized to make that information publicly accessible. Train those authorized individuals that the information that they're putting out there doesn't contain non-public information. Make sure that we're reviewing the proposed content prior to posting, right? Before we put it on that public website. Make sure that it is public information, that is not public or non-public information. And once you review it before you put it on, the last bullet speaks about reviewing the content on the publicly accessible system for that non-public information quarterly. And this is the minimum, right? You must do it at least quarterly. You may have somebody looking at it more often, but if you review it at least quarterly and remove that information when it's discovered, you'll be in compliance with the CJIS security policy. And that's all we have for access control. We'll move right into incident response. As I said before, 18 security control families, incident response is one of those. IR-1 says policy and procedures. Same thing again, if your state or someone is covering your incident response policy, inherit it, right? You may have different procedures to meet that policy, but inherit where you can. Again, an annual review of that policy and procedures. IR2 speaks to the incident response training. We have, awareness and training in our A2 section of the CJIS, AT section of the CJIS security policy. But we want to prepare those people who are going to be providing our incident response. We want to make sure they have training for those assigned roles and responsibilities prior to assuming that role, right? We don't want to throw somebody in that role who's untrained, right? We want to make sure that they have the training they need prior to assuming that role or acquiring that system access. We also want to make sure that they have incident response training when required by system changes. If a system changes, what happens, if an incident occurs with some of that system changes? We want to make sure that we're trained on how to respond to that incident for those system changes. And then lastly, annually thereafter. So if you have someone assigned to your incident response team, make sure that their incident response training occurs annually. The next bullet under the parent IR2 speaks about reviewing and updating that incident response training content annually. Is what you're doing to respond to a distributed denial of service attack or a malicious code introduction. Is it adequate, right? Did you have a malicious code event or incident, let me say it that way, that you should have done something different, right? Review and update that incident response training at least annually. And then, as you can see there, following any security incidents involving unauthorized access to the CJI, the systems used to process CJI. Continuing within that same family of incident response, 2, control enhancement 3 is a breach. Provide the incident and training on how to identify and respond to a breach, including your organization's process for responding to a breach. IR3, incident response testing. The time to test your incident response plan is not when you're in the midst of responding to an incident. You want to test the effectiveness of that incident response capability through tabletop, walkthrough exercises, simulations, or other agency-appropriate tests, right? Don't start testing your incident response during in the midst of a cyber event, or a cyber incident. You want to make sure that your incident response plan coordinates with your other related plans, such as organizational elements responsible for those related plans, but you want to make sure your incident response plan is coordinated with your other related plans within your organization. There are 5 different areas of incident handling: preparation, detection and analysis, containment, eradication, and recovery. Preparation, we're waiting on an incident to happen. Detection and analysis, something has happened. What is it, right? And then we determine that it is an event, it is an incident. Now we need to contain that to make sure it doesn't spread throughout the system. And then we need to get rid of it, the eradication, and then finally recovery. And this is a cyclical process here. Recovery falls right back into preparation. So, but we want to implement that incident handling capability for incidents that includes these 5 areas. Coordinate this incident handling activities with contingency planning. If you have, as I was speaking about a minute ago, we had a malicious code intrusion that was successful. What did we learn when we were responding to that? And that's what this bullet speaks about: incorporating those lessons learned from an ongoing incident handling activity into your procedures, your training, your testing, right? Implement those resulting changes accordingly, and then ensure the rigor, intensity, and scope and results of those incident handling activities are comparable and predictable across the organization. With the control enhancement here, we want to use automated incident handling processes, right? We want to make sure that we support the incident handling process using automated mechanisms, such as an online incident management system, tools that support the collection of live response data, full network packet capture, forensic analysis. What is this piece of malicious code able to do? What is it doing? How's it working within the system, right? So we want to make sure we use some automation to help us with that. IR5, incident monitoring, track and document the incidents, maintain those records, right? Sources can include network monitoring, your incident response, incident reports, users, supply chain partners, right? If you have some of your hardware within your system, as far as incident monitoring, right? We want to make sure we include those supply chain partners in our when we're tracking and documenting those incidents. If we have incident, make sure that we report those to the proper officials. As you can see there, it says immediately, but not to exceed within 1 hour after discovery. If you have a successful incident, is what we call them, like a malicious code successfully infiltrating the system, that is called an incident. Make sure you're reporting that to your personnel, your organizational personnel with incident handling responsibilities. And then notify your CJIS systems officer, your SIB chief, or interface agency official, whoever signed the CJIS user agreement. Make sure we're notifying those personnel. IR6 control enhancement 1, automated reporting. Report those incidents Use automated mechanisms to do that. Use email. Maybe you have a website that you're reporting this to, right? An internal website that has automatic updates. We found this malicious code. We are working on it. We have it contained. We're working on eradicating, but provide those notifications to those individuals in IR6 using some automation through that. Supply chain coordination, control enhancement 3 there at the bottom of the screen. If you have something, you've noticed something that on a router that's how you were infiltrated, provide that incident information to the provider of that product. You don't have to release criminal justice information, right? So therefore we wouldn't have to clear anybody, right? But if the supplier of that router, that piece of hardware, that piece of software, if that's how the perpetrator gained access into the system, make sure that the provider of the product is aware so that they can start patching that to prevent that exploit from being or that vulnerability from being exploited exponentially across the nation. As far as incident response assistance in IR7, you want to make sure that you provide that incident response support resource that offers advice and assistance to the user's systems through help desk, through assistance groups, through automated ticketing systems, right? Again, automation for the support for the availability of information support. Increase the availability of incident response information and support using those automated mechanisms. Maybe you have a push-pull capability to get assistance on an incident. If you have external assistance, right? If you have someone who is going to be coming in and helping you respond to this incident, plan for that, right? They are going to have unescorted access to unencrypted CJI. Plan for that. Do you need a security addendum? Do you need the outsourcing standard on the non-criminal justice side of things? Plan for that so that when it happens, they're allowed to come in and start helping you with the response for this incident. You'll have to have an incident response plan. You can see that there's a lot of bullets in here, but we just want to develop a plan that provides that roadmap, right? The approach for incident response, defines those reportable incidents, reviewed and approved by your organization's executive leadership annually. It designates a responsibility for incident response to those organizational personnel with incident reporting responsibilities, and your CSO, your CJIS systems officer, your state identification bureau chief, or that interface agency official. Just make sure your incident response plan has these bullets within it. As far as that incident response plan, you want to make sure you distribute copies, right? Everybody needs a playbook before we get into an incident response plan. Update that incident response plan to address those system changes or problems encountered during plan implementation, execution, or testing, right? You had a tabletop exercise. You're walking through your incident response plan and your network administrator says, this is not how I would respond. Make sure you update that incident response plan with how they would respond to these things. Communicate those changes out to your organizational personnel with incident handling responses, and protect that incident response plan from unauthorized disclosure. You don't want how you're going to respond to an incident being given out to the wrong people, right? It's like giving them the playbook of how you're going to respond to a malicious code or a distributed denial of service attack or something like that. Control enhancement and this is the last control within incident response IRA control enhancement 1, which is breaches. And that is not something you wear. This is an actual breach of the information security system. But you want to make sure you include the following if you have a PII breach: the process to determine if a notice to the individuals is needed, right? You had some PII, personally identifiable information that was breached. What are you doing to protect that individual? You want to make sure you have an assessment process to determine the extent of harm, the embarrassment, the inconvenience for those individuals. And then lastly, identification of applicable privacy requirements. And that is the last control within incident response. Now we're going to move into our last security control family in version 5.9.3, and that is maintenance. And as I said earlier, we're not talking about system patching. And again, I'll reiterate, patch your systems. SI2 talks about flaw remediation. Patch your systems. Patch your systems. If you statistics show if we have multi-factor authentication, we patch our systems, we can control a lot of cyber events so they wouldn't turn into cyber incidents. Maintenance, as far as the -1 control of the average security control family, same policy and procedures, right? You're going to have maintenance policy, you're going to have maintenance procedures. Review those annually. We're going to have controlled maintenance, MA2, controlled maintenance. Schedule, document, review the records of maintenance, repair, and replacement on those system components, right? We know when they're coming in. What did they do? Review their records, right? Approve and monitor all those maintenance activities, whether it's performed on site or do you have somebody remoting in, right, that's doing the maintenance on that. But you want to approve and monitor all of those. And then require organizational personnel with information security and privacy responsibilities. Make sure that they explicitly approve the removal of the system or system components. You have someone comes in that's getting ready to take out one of your printers, all right? You're going to carry your printer out. Make sure that your information security professional is looking at that, making sure that all the ROM has been removed, the hard drives. Make sure that, you know, it could have processed criminal justice information. A lot of this technology has hard drives in it. Maybe you go to the extent of removing the RAM, right? But make sure that your LASO, your local agency security officer, your state ISO, or on a non-criminal justice side, your authorized recipient security officer, make sure they explicitly approve the removal of those system or system components. Still under the MA2 controlled maintenance, sanitize that equipment that is to be removed to make sure that, you know, it's going off for off-site maintenance or repair, replacement, or destruction. Make sure you sanitize it, right? Sanitize it using media protection controls found in the CJIS Security Policy. Remove that information, you know, criminal justice information. Remove that, any of your organizational information prior to that being removed from your facility. Check all potentially impacted controls to verify that they are still functioning following maintenance. So you've had your printer worked on. What did they work on? Make sure that those controls are still functioning properly, right? When you're tracking this maintenance, as you can see there in controlled maintenance, the last bullet, include the following information in organizationally maintenance records: the component name, the serial number, the date and time of maintenance. What was the maintenance performed? Who performed it, right? Including the escort if it was required. It would be required if this person doesn't have a fingerprint-based background check and awareness training. But what was done to what you know, equipment, and when was it done? We've had some examples of where agencies have procured computers, and when they were establishing the configuration management on that, they've noticed that the BIOS had been flashed 3 times before. By whom? We don't know, right? But we had to make sure that we started with a fresh BIOS on that device. So make sure you know you have detailed records, component, serial number, date and time of maintenance, who performed it and who did it, right? The names of the entity or the escort that was approved with it as well, or that was associated with it as well. MA3, maintenance tools. We want to make sure that that we approve and control and monitor the use of system maintenance tools, and review those approved maintenance tools prior to each use. So we have someone coming in to work on a copier, and they're bringing something in, a laptop or something like that. We want to inspect the tools used by those maintenance personnel. Do they have an active virus on it, right? We don't want to be connecting a laptop or something like that to our system that has an active virus on it. You know, check those diagnostic and test programs for malicious code before the media are used on the system, right? Look at those tools before you allow them to connect to your system. Prevent the unauthorized removal of the equipment by verifying that there is no organizational information contained on that equipment, sanitizing and destroying the equipment. Perhaps you retain the equipment, right? Perhaps your contract says, look, if you got to switch out a hard drive in that copier, I keep the hard drive, right? Or you obtain an exemption from your organizational personnel with system maintenance responsibilities that explicitly authorizes that removal of the equipment from the facility, right? This ties back into the previous control we were speaking about. If you have non-local maintenance, someone who's actually remoting in, we want to make sure that we approve and monitor that non-local maintenance and those diagnostic activities. Watch them as they're doing whatever they're doing. Allow the use of that non-local maintenance diagnostic tools only as consistent with your organizational policy and documented in that system security plan. Strong authentication in the establishment of non-local maintenance, right? Multi-factor authentication. Know who that identity is on the remote side. Make sure they use multi-factor authentication before you allow them to do that non-local maintenance. Maintain the records for that non-local maintenance and those diagnostic activities. And when the non-local maintenance is completed, make sure you terminate the session and the network connections. MA5 talks about the maintenance personnel, establishing a process for maintenance personnel authorization and maintain a list of those authorized maintenance organizations personnel. Verify that non-escorted personnel performing maintenance possess the required access authorizations, right? Fingerprint-based background check, security awareness training. Make sure that these people that are non-escorted, that you've cleared them, you know who they are. And then lastly on this one, designate organizational personnel with required access authorizations and technical competence to supervise the maintenance activities of those who don't possess the required access authorizations. So if you don't clear somebody through a fingerprint-based background check or an awareness training, whoever you have escorting them, make sure they have the required access authorizations. Make sure they have the technical competence to know what this person is modifying so that they can't, the person can't modify this equipment without someone being knowledgeable and saying, hey, wait, stop, don't do that, right? That's what this one is speaking about here. And the last control within our maintenance control family is the timely maintenance. Make sure, and you'll do this through a business impact analysis and your recovery time objectives, your recovery point objectives, which are under incident response. How much can I afford to lose, right? Before I become unsuccessful in my mission. So you want to obtain maintenance supports, spare parts for those critical system components. Within your agency defined recovery time and recovery point objectives. That's the RTO and the RPO. How often am I backing up? If I just backed up, if I back up every hour, and I lost a piece of hardware, maybe I'm okay with those spare parts for those critical. Do I need to go back for that hour? How much can I afford to be down before I'm back in operational and I lose my mission? And with that, we're going to transition into questions. Before I do that, though, I want to give the contact information for the FBI CJIS Information Security Officer. As you've listened to me for the past, I'm not even sure how long I've been talking here. Chris Weatherly, I'm the FBI CJIS Information Security Officer. I do have a Deputy ISO, Jeff Campbell, who serves as the deputy when I'm not around. And then Holden Cross is our Senior Technical Analyst. Both are involved in the call today. The best way to reach us is that iso@fbi.gov. If you send an email to that address, it will end up in each one of our inboxes. Know that we will, when we respond to you, we will copy your state information security officer just so they know we're conversing with you. And they may have some local information assurance requirements or more localized response to your questions. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and we'll jump right into the questions and answer. Maria, I believe you're muted.
You're correct, Chris. I was muted, so forgive me on that. I was actually just thanking you for what was a always extremely informative, extremely detailed, extremely comprehensive presentation. At the moment, we seem to have in the vicinity of 12 questions, so I'll go through those. I'm going to read those verbatim because there's lots of ways to interpret these things. I will say that I know at the top of the hour, there were questions about the availability of the PowerPoint presentation. That's the only question that I am able to answer. And I'll tell you that we will disseminate that or make that available once that has been approved finally or in final form as a PDF by Chris. And then we'll make that available to you as we've done in the past. But I will review. Chris, if you're ready, I'll go ahead and give you some questions.
Yep, let's do it.
All right. So will I just provide a list of commercial partner solutions which the FBI has approved in a jurisdiction for machine registration, identification, MFA, et cetera, for compliance with the new CJIS Security Policy 5.9.3. Now, I have a perspective on that, Chris, but I think it should come from the Bureau first.
Yeah, I have a perspective on that as well. So the CJIS division does not certify any products when it comes to the CJIS security policy. We do, if a vendor or a solution provider presents to you and claims they are CJIS certified to provide this, ask them who certified them, because it was not the CJIS division that did so. We do have a certified products list for our biometrics, and you can find that on FBIBioSpecs.gov, I believe it is. But for CJIS security policy, we do not have a CJIS certification for that. What we generally ask or advise agencies to do is, and we've told many service providers this, there's the requirements and companion document that exists on FBI.gov that associates, that accompanies each CJIS security policy release. And Jeff Campbell, my deputy ISO, has coined that the stuff without the fluff, right? It's just the shall statements. It's just the requirements within the CJIS security policy. We advise many service providers to actually, use that requirements and companion document and answer how they can help an agency meet the CJIS security policy through that. So hopefully that gives a Bureau perspective of that, and we'll let IJIS take over from there.
Absolutely. And it goes without saying, but I will say it out loud because it was posed to IJIS. We will always follow the lead of CJIS in this area. Wherever we can support or provide recommendations, we will. But certification is not a business that we want to be in, nor do we think it's prudent. These are the requirements coming from the Bureau, and therefore they are the ones that lead this. So the second question, can search engine optimization be improved for the CJIS security policy? We had many agencies use Google to search for CJIS security policy, and the top result directed to version 5.9, with the second result going to 5.9.1.
I'm not certain how to I'm not certain how to optimize those search engines to be able to do that. If you're looking for the latest policy, I would go to FBI.gov and conduct your search there within that domain. A browser of your choice search, we've been victim to that as well, to where it resulted in an older piece of the policy. Within our signature line, if you send an email to iso@fbi.gov, within each of our signature lines, we do link to the FBI.gov page, which has a current policy on it. So Charlie may have some follow-up on that.
If you use Bing, it takes you to the right place. And I'm not kidding. I just did it. And if you use Bing instead of Google, you will get to the right.
All right. That's the extent of our certification process. Are those new account attributes required for accessing indirect CJI?
Currently, yes. The CJIS security policy is currently applicable to CJI access no matter how you get it. Now, we are the Compact Council, which is a non-criminal justice community, is looking at a reduced set of security controls for criminal justice information that is accessed to an indirect means. I don't know. I can't speak right off the cuff about if AC2 and the attributes are specifically required for that in that lower subset or those lesser controls. But the Compact Council is looking at that, and we'll see what happens in the spring of 24.
Will adding additional attributes to the Active Directory satisfy the requirements in AC2?
Yes.
Okay.
That was a
nice one.
Yeah, I like that one.
How does that work for people traveling internationally? As long as the data is encrypted via CJIS compliant VPN, is that allowed?
So the CJIS security policy is moot on where you're accessing from. So and the individual is correct. As long as we have encryption of the data in transit, encryption of the data at rest, the CJIS security policy is good with that. Make sure the individual is someone that you've authorized that has a fingerprint-based background check, the proper security awareness training. There is one restriction on storing criminal justice information outside of the U.S. territories, tribes, spoke about territories again, or APB member countries. And currently the only APB member country we have is Canada. So you cannot store criminal justice information outside of those locations that I just mentioned.
Okay, AC 11, is the exemption just for the 30-minute auto lock, or would that also include manual locking?
The exemption for the device lock is an auto lock. And that's only within a criminal justice conveyance that's within a physically secure locations for dispatch or receive only terminals that are staffed 24 hours. The manual lock, if the officer were to get out of their criminal justice conveyance through the rules of behavior, we would require them to lock that information terminal before they left it. Yeah.
There's a comment here, not so much a question. Further details on MFA in use in cruisers and defining cruisers as secure location would be helpful.
Okay.
That's really just a point for the future.
I can speak to that if we have time.
So
multi-factor authentication, it used to be you only had to use it if you were directly accessing criminal justice information from outside a physically secure location. But now it doesn't matter. Multi-factor authentication is required no matter who you are, where you are. And as far as defining cruisers as a secure location, Section 5.9 of the current policy defines a cruiser as a criminal justice conveyance, right, or a secure location. So it does have that in the existing policy now.
Okay, it's a little lengthy one. Question about CJIS version 5.9.3, section media marketing. The text appears to have been struck in the version published by FBI website. The summary of changes indicates that the discussion has been modified to provide guidance on properly marketing CJI. The question is, has MP3 been incorporated elsewhere, removed, or is this strike through an error?
Yeah, that's a great question. MP3 talks about that media marking, right? And it talks about controlled unclassified information and how to mark criminal justice information when it's outside a physically secure location. And it was originally approved by the APB back in 2001, I believe. 2021. 2001 was quite a few years ago. But in 2021, the APB approved that. What we found is that there is an executive order out there for the controlled unclassified information, but to date, the Department of Justice nor the FBI has a controlled unclassified information program. Therefore, we didn't want to, the Bureau, didn't want the APB communities or the compact communities being held to something that the APB or the Department of Justice was not answering to themselves. So currently MP3 has been, it still exists in the policy, but it's been stricken. I believe it may be grayed out to indicate that agencies will not be held to that audit, to that requirement, and will not be audited as such.
Well, what tool do you use to assess these controls?
There's lots of ways. We've found that there are some vulnerability scanners out there that do have the CJIS security policy as one of their templates. As far as the Bureau, we use a manual process and an interview process when we're looking at states, CJIS systems agency to audit those. But there are vulnerability scanners that do have CJIS security policy as one of their templates.
Okay. Do you require MFA at the application at the application level as well as the desktop/laptop?
We would prefer that the multi-factor authentication be as close to the access to criminal justice information as possible. Now, we always say it depends. That's a standard security answer for everything. It depends, right? Because you have to really start pulling some strings and looking at implementation. but it depends on the permissions that everyone has on that desktop once they get in, or the operating environment. Once they get into that operating environment, does everybody have the same type of permissions? If so, then you may be able to use, Kerberos ticketing or single sign-on solution to get into your criminal justice information application. But if not, then you want that multi-factor authentication as close to the access to criminal justice information.
Are passkeys compliant with CJIS policies for authentication?
So with the new identification authentication, long passphrases are acceptable. I'm not certain what we're talking about with passkeys, and that may just be my ignorance on those. So perhaps if that individual could define or maybe re-ask that question.
I believe that a gentleman by the name of Isaac Zenger. Isaac, if you can give us a little clarification or write it in, we can close the loop with Chris before the end of the session.
Yeah, please.
All right. In regards to the FIPS 140-2 encryption requirements, would historical certificates be compliant?
FIPS 140-2, the historical certificates currently, all right, let me say, it depends. The historical certificates are fine now. However, FIPS 140-2 is being deprecated by FIPS 140-3, and in September of 2025, only FIPS 140-3 will be considered CJIS compliant. So currently, FIPS 140-2 and the historical certs are good. Moving in September of 2025, we'll be moving to FIPS 140-2, and we would require those to be current.
Okay. In general, what are the main differences between FedRAMP and CJIS compliance?
So in general, I mean, FedRAMP is, the NIST 800-53 controls, and service providers answer that. They get authorization, if you will, through the FedRAMP process. They get authorization that their solution can meet the controls within NIST 800-53. If you have a FedRAMP approved or authorized solution, there's a real good chance that it's going to meet CJIS compliance. However, there are some nuances that FedRAMP would not answer or address. Let me say it that way. Fingerprint, background checks, right? Fingerprint-based background checks would not be something that a FedRAMP authorization would cover. So it's a good start. A FedRAMP authorization is a good start, but make sure that your CJIS systems officer, your SIB chief, your interface agency official, is you're using the CJIS security policy as your baseline for those compliance.
Okay. I would love more discussion regarding what data falls under CJIS data. Information obtained in a traffic stop, for example, is that data required to be secured in the same manner as the data I obtained through BCI? From what I heard you say before, the answer would be no.
So criminal justice information is information that's provided by FBI CJIS. So if you have anything that didn't come back from FBI CJIS, then that would not be considered criminal justice information and would not be subjected to the CJIS security policy. Can you repeat the last part of it again, information?
Yes. Let me just get back to it.
Yep.
Information obtained in a traffic stop, for example, is that data required to be secured in the same manner as the data I would obtain through BCI? The writer, Stephen, thought that the interpretation would likely be no.
Right. So I'll answer it the same way I did before. Criminal justice information is information provided from FBI CJIS. So if you did get something back from FBI CJIS security policy would be required or in play, and the data would be subjected to that. If it is state or only state or local data, then no, the CJIS security policy would not apply.
Will the new audit version 3 require an MSP to assist with 5-15 SI-4, or is the system monitoring something that can be done in-house without the help of a service provider?
Yeah, another great question. SI-4, in Chris's opinion, is one of it's the most important control. It's system monitoring, right? It's knowing what normal data looks like, so therefore you can know what abnormal data looks like. Is it something that can be done in-house? Yes, but there are automated means to do it as well through, like a SIM that would help you with that, or it can be done, or you can employ someone to do that for you. Now, if you do have someone who's helping you with this control, you want to make sure that you have a contract with them that mentions the CJIS security policy. You want to make sure that that contract contains a security addendum. You also want to make sure that everyone in that service provider that's going to have that unescorted access to unencrypted CGI certifies that they are aware of the CJIS security policy and will abide by it. And they do that so that we can make sure that they're aware of the CJIS security policy and will abide by it.
Okay, I like this next one. Are you broadcasting from the official CJIS recording studio?
Not the official one. No, this is my own personal one.
Okay.
Who asked that?
Doc Petty.
Oh, good friend. Good to see you.
I sort of figured.
Good to hear from you.
For restricting USB devices, do you have a use case for that? Restricting is a broad term.
Restricting is a broad term, and we try not to be too definitive because it would come down as heavy-handed of how you're doing that. But as far as restricting USB devices, there are ways to do that. Media protection would list three ways: technological ways, administrative ways, and I think there's some others. I've heard people that have epoxied the USB drive itself, the thumb drive, where you put it in the computer. But most people do it through management control and having the user sign the rules of behavior.
Okay, regarding the 30-minute lock on non-use, if a laptop and a PD cruiser can stay unlocked, what happens when they remove it from the laptop from the car? Any suggestions on how to handle that? Yeah,
then it's leaving that secured, enclosed criminal justice conveyance, and therefore, they would be required to, just as if the officer were leaving, we would want them to lock that screen somehow. But once they authenticate and are actively in that police cruiser themselves, then we have the device lock exemption. But if they're able to remove it, and if they do remove it, then absolutely, it's no longer within that physical secure criminal justice conveyance, and the policy would then apply. Charlie may have some more on that.
No, I think it's a very subtle question, because when it's in the cruiser, it has the 30-minute timeout, but when it's removed, it doesn't know that it's been removed. So how do you handle that timeout if it's sitting in Denny's, right? So I think it's a little more subtle of a question. How do you do that? And that's the suggestions for how do you handle that? And it's a very good question.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, Charlie, and that's something we haven't addressed yet. So that would almost be like a user or a management control, where we're requiring that officer to make sure that they are meeting that requirement when it's outside the cruiser.
Okay, and something still associated with that is MFA required for system access within a secure facility, i.e. within the physical police department building in a secure location?
Yeah, short answer is yes. Multi-factor authentication required no matter who you are or where you are.
And I think you've already addressed this, but could you please confirm if police cruisers also need MFA? I missed what was said.
Yes, cruisers, yeah. No matter who you are, where you are, multi-factor authentication is required.
Okay. Is self-service allowed for unlocking after logon failures or for password resets?
Currently, no. The policy says that after logon failures, it must be an admin that releases the account.
Okay, and I think
as far as I'm sorry, let me address this. You said password resets as well. Password resets, definitely self-service is allowed for that.
Okay, and this is really more of a comment than a question. Google Microsoft, and this is not even Charlie. Google Microsoft allows for use of passkeys on phone for logging into various things and moving away from passwords as much as possible, where you get a notification to your phone and via some sort of biometric
Authentication.
Thank you.
Yes.
Allow access. So again, more of a comment than it is a question.
Would this happen to be from because it mentions passkeys?
Isaac.
Okay, so it is the same individual. So we're thinking something along the Microsoft Windows hello, right? Hello for business, and so that is permitted as long as it meets is stored in the trusted execution environment or the trusted platform module. The key that you're unlocking is stored within one of those two areas of the environment. Definitely, that is something that we could use. Some other things, fast identity online, which is a standard. FIDO is a standard. As long as your authenticator meets that FIDO standard, you'd be fine. There's some other technologies that would also meet that passkey definition. So thank you very much for asking that again.
Okay, there was a request to reconfirm the password requirements, the length, the special character usage, etc., now within the requirement and use of MFA.
Yeah, so the currently within the policy, it does say that we have, if you're using basic passwords or you're using a memorized secret, you must have uppercase, lowercase, the complexity within a password, uppercase, lowercase, special characters, numbers. We are moving away from that, and we're moving away from that in October of 2024 when long passphrases, something that the user can remember, is what we're moving toward. But the basic passwords, as far as the complexity, if you're using it, you still have to meet those complexity. But again, we're moving away from that. We're looking to, we got approval from the APB to sunset that complexity requirements in October of 2024.
Okay, next one is about FIPS 140-3. It is my understanding that FIPS 140-2 is no longer acceptable as of September 26th, but I believe Chris said 25. Please confirm.
That may very well be true. I'll have somebody look into that, and maybe we can get that answered by the end of this phone call.
Okay. The question is, will the recording of this presentation be available? And yes, it'll be available on the IJIS website. And then that same person validated. One more. Could you clarify the date for FIPS 140-3? And it's the same reference to 25 versus 26.
Yeah, I've got some people looking at that now. So
you got it. If we are interfacing and downloading information with local RMS that contains data pulled from FBI systems, NDEX, NCIC, does this mean our system should follow CJI? I am thinking yes, but as a secondary source.
So the secondary source comment kind of confuses me. But if you do have downloading information within your local RMS that contains criminal justice information, i.e. FBI CJIS provided information, then yes, your system is subjected to the CJIS security policy.
Right, and the same individual, David Halliday, had a follow-up that I think repeats itself, but that we download information from a local PD RMS that may contain CJIS. I am assuming our system has some CJIS and must follow the policy. So they're looking at validation that they must follow the policy itself. Yeah, right now, the policy says yes, that if it possesses criminal justice information, i.e. FBI CJIS provided information, then yes, it must follow the policy. Now, all right, there's some things that we're working on to maybe eliminate that, but that's a long process. And this is a long question. Regarding MP5C, documenting activities associated with the transport of a system media apply to all transportation of any printout from CJIS system, and any recommendations for how to make that manageable for agencies like DAs taking files between secure locations and the court. How much detail is needed for that documentation?
That is a long question. Can we?
So we're at the top of it. We're talking about MP5C, parentheses, documenting activities associated with the transport of system media.
Okay.
Does that apply to transportation of any printout from the CJIS system, and any recommendations on how to make that manageable for agencies like DAs taking files between secure locations and the court? How much detail is needed for that documentation? So it's the movement from A to B, and then how much documentation?
Yeah, so there's a sister requirement with that talks about restricting it, right? Restricting that transport of system media. So however you're restricting it, that's what it's saying. Document the activities associated with that transport. As far as any recommendations on how to make it manageable, it's simply, just like I say, just a restricting of making sure that only authorized personnel have access to that system. Now, once the system, I heard mentions of district attorneys taking files between secure locations and
the courts.
Right. So once they present it to the court, it is now, it's a part of a judicial proceeding. The CJIS security policy falls off. And the court has this information that is now, public record, if you will. So I would restrict and document what you're doing as an authorized agency, as an authorized individual, up to the point that it's released into, public record. Hopefully that answers the question.
Okay. Do any states have success in implementing the CJIS model? And are there any info portals to share some of those plans, publicly shareable information, some success stories, white papers, etc.?
There are many states that have successfully implemented, that have zero IT security audit findings. And as far as I know, there's no white papers or, success stories that are publicly available. We are working, when I say we're talking about FBI CJIS division. We are working with the NIST, National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, to produce a white paper related to multi-factor authentication, what some states are doing, the lessons learned when they were implementing that, some of the hurdles that they had to overcome. One of those big hurdles they have to overcome is corrections, where you can't take a device into the facility with you. We are looking to publish that in the summer of 24. So that is something that we can hang our hat on then. But as far, there are states that have zero audit findings, and if the person would like to submit that question to ISO@fbi.gov, we can try to share some of that, or put them in touch with someone who has successfully implemented one of those controls within that state.
Okay. A comment/question. SI7A employs integrity verification tools to detect unauthorized changes to software and firmware. How do small departments afford all of the software?
A question we get a lot. What about the local agency, the small departments? I mean, it's a high number of departments across the nation who have less than 25 officers, right? And the IT person is the person that drew the short straw. One of the things that we mentioned is that CISA, the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, has grants, state and local cybersecurity grants that people can apply for. FEMA has grants as well. I also work with the International Association of Chiefs of Police. They are assembling a list of resources for that granting, for those granting opportunities. But in this call, I would recommend that person reach out to their emergency management agency of their state and mention cybersecurity grants, and then go down that route for that. But it's a question we get all the time, so it's a great question, and we're trying to expose those entities to those granting opportunities.
Okay. Are there trusted entities to use for checking compromised password list?
Yes. So one of the well, I guess it'll be taken through in the next round. One of the topic papers that we're taking through in the next round of the APB is You have the compromised password list. The control says that I'll maintain a compromised password list. What it doesn't say is how often you bounce your Active Directory or directory services against that compromised password list, or what to use. We have been working with NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NCCOE, National Cybersecurity Center of Excellence, and also on the website, Have I Been Pwned? PWNED, Have I Been Pwned, is a trusted website that contains over 5 billion compromised passwords. The FBI and the United Kingdom has recently started adding to this compromised password list. That's the way we're going to try to lead the APB to use that website as the overall standard for compromised password list.
Okay. You made mention that Windows Hello was acceptable as a logon option. Did I hear that correctly?
Windows Hello for business. It has to be for business, but definitely that is one that is acceptable for multi-factor authentication.
Okay.
And to add to that, Maria, we can share this with the IJIS Institute. We have a recipe or a cookbook on how to configure Windows Hello for Business that we've run past Chris, and we can share that through the IJIS Institute on how to configure that for folks to conform the policy.
That would be great. Thank you, Charlie.
Maria, if I could go back to the FIPS question, it is September 21st, 2026.
Yeah, and that's one of the responses I was guessing was linked to yours, but yes, all good on that.
Very good.
One or two more questions here. Do services interacting system to system which retrieve CJI data need to comply with MFA and machine identification of CJIS security policy?
System to system, there would need to be some identification there. There'd need to be a system account. It's difficult when you have system accounts and you're doing multi-factor authentication. So what you would do is use a little bit of risk-based information assurance here. That system account would have an incredibly long password, complex password that only the system would know, and would be changed on an annual basis. That is something that we've done in a risk-based environment before. But as far as machine identification, definitely there needs to be some sort of mutual auth between those two servers, that they understand that they're talking to the correct entity. So, okay. But there is that is that risk-based information assurance. I have a system account. There's no way to do MFA on that. Let's add a extremely long, memorized secret to that.
All right. To clarify MP5C requirement, does that mean that the agency has documentation that the user who is transporting the CJI is authorized, or it is more granular to document a specific document was transported by a specific authorized individual? I could read that again if you want.
Yes, please.
To clarify the MP5C requirement, does that mean that the agency has documentation that the user who is transporting the CJI is authorized, or is it more granular to document a specific document was transported by a specific authorized individual? I personally need a whiteboard for that.
Yeah, that has some circular references in there. So it's not about the actual user who is transporting, because we're assuming that user is an authorized user, but it's all about the transportation of it. How's it being done, right? Is it locked in the container? How's it secured when we're transporting this data? It's not about the actual user. It's more about the transportation of the information. Hopefully that answered it.
Okay. For the maintenance documentation policy, does that apply to all devices, i.e. laptops, desktops, phones, or primarily for equipment that is data centered, as in servers and switches? Also, how long do the records need to be kept with that level of detail?
So the maintenance documentation policy, that is for your peripherals, your printers, your scanners, your copiers, things like that. The other equipment will be covered in your configuration management plan. which was approved by the APB just a couple of weeks back. And as far as the retention of those records, as long as that device is within the architecture, the facility, or within the I'll say the architecture of the system. Yeah.
Okay. Is the agency who has an employee that has opened the information to the public accidentally or maliciously, who is primarily the one who deals with the legalities or the consequences, or is that something covered only by the agency in question? So is the agency who has the employee that has opened the information to the public accidentally or maliciously, who is primarily responsible and who has to deal with the legalities, or is it someone that is covered only by the agency in question? This is Walker J.
Yeah, if we could get some clarification, or maybe send that to ISO@FBI.gov, to where we can actually start pulling some threads to see exactly what this individual was looking for.
Okay. We've gone back to a couple of reiterations on the same questions with the cookbook, so that will be provided to them.
Okay.
There was also what was the compromised password list site once again?
Have I been pwned? And I think it's HVEIBENNPWNED. Have I been pwned? But if you use a browser of your choice and look for that, it's the one that's maintained by Troy Hunt.
Okay. What's the recommended way to apply MFA on an iPhone?
So definitely you want, if you're using a mobile device, you want to put that multi-factor authentication as close to the criminal justice, access to the criminal justice information. And I think this question is asking something around, can I use the biometric that I used to unlock the phone as one of the factors of authentication? And no, device unlock is not part of that multi-factor authentication. So I hope that's what it was asking, but we need multi-factor authentication as close to the criminal justice information. Now, once you get down to that criminal justice information application, you could use a biometric to unlock a token or a user certificate, something in that trusted execution environment off of the iPhone. You could use a biometric, a look, or a fingerprint to unlock that token that would be sent across in the authentication chain. So definitely there's a way to do that, but you cannot use whatever you use to unlock the device as a factor of authentication. It has to be something else after that.
Okay, so the next one is a little bit of a puzzle, and Matt Urban, you might have to clarify this, but I'm going to read it as is. For 30-minute lock in the car versus out of the car, it states of car, it must auto lock. So not, quote, train the user to lock, unquote. But you mentioned the laptop going in and out of the car, you would train the users for when out of the car. With current wording, remember, I'm only delivering this. With current wording, how does it not auto-locking when out of the car meet the currently written requirement? It currently feels like a contradiction in a policy. I think.
So, what was you saying again, Maria?
I was going to say, I think maybe we need a little clarification, but I certainly don't mind repeating it again.
No, I don't want to put you through that. It's something that was brought up, and Charlie made the call there. You know, how does the system know it's not inside a physically secure location or a enclosed criminal justice conveyance? Definitely we would need, so it comes down to a user being trained that, hey, when I'm inside a car, it's okay to let it go. But if I leave the car, I need to lock it. If I take it outside and I'm sitting, at a Denny's, I need to make sure that nobody can see the system I'm looking at. That when, if I get up and walk away from it, I'm locking the system, so it's more of a training issue with the user versus the technical bringing it out of the car, the technical capability would still exist. It wouldn't unlock, as Charlie had brought forward. I'm sorry, it wouldn't lock after 30 minutes of inactivity. So it would come down to a user training and making sure they lock the system when it's unattended.
And actually, Matt did provide clarification, Chris. Forgive me. This is the last thing that's been written. The main question is this: the CJIS policy says that it must auto lock, not that the user must lock it.
Right, and that's what we say. After 30 minutes of inactivity, the system will auto lock. However, there are exemptions that if it's within a physically secure location, dispatch or receive only terminal, or if it's in a enclosed criminal justice conveyance, the system is exempt from that. So therefore, we have to rely on the user to lock that when they're outside of those 3 exemption areas.
Okay, that is the end of the questions. Chris, I just want to give you the floor first before we do the closing statements, but any closing remarks, any messages you want to still convey?
No, again, I want to be thankful to IJIS for providing this forum, allowing us to get this information out there. It's a lot of information. It can be confusing. Security policy can be confusing. So I definitely am thankful to IJIS for partnering with the FBI CJIS division and providing this method of delivery. So thank you very much.
Well, you're very welcome. It is something that we always are welcome to do and always looking forward to it. Charlie, any thoughts from your perspective?
No thoughts. Thank you, Chris. That was great. Appreciate the collaboration.
Okay, so with that, a couple of things. Chris, we can't do this without you. We are so appreciative. I'm always awestruck that you've got all the answers to the questions, even when we're not understanding the questions. That being said, I'm very grateful. Charlie, the same to you. I appreciate all the leadership within the working group and everything that's been accomplished there. And I send a special thanks out to all of the attendees, those that registered, those that are still with us here an hour and a half later. Dedicated to the cause of actually ensuring the successful implementation of the update. So please know these resources will be available to you on this IJIS website. We are here as a collective team, so whatever questions that you want to send out to any one of us, we'll make sure it gets to the appropriate individuals and that those responses will be provided to you. So I thank you all very much and wish you all a good day.